Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the ARIANA Resources PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and will publish those responses where it's appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform. Before we begin, I would just like to submit the following poll, and if you'd give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company would be most grateful. And I would now like to hand you over to Chairman Michael de Villiers. Michael, good morning, sir.
Good morning, and thank you for hosting us. Good morning, all, and thank you for attending. We've had a lot to talk about since our last Investor Meet Company presentation and our presentation at Mines and Money last year. In particular, our proposed merger with Rockover and the proposed Dowke project. I'm going to hand over to Kerem, who's going to give us an overall update, and then we're going to go into the various questions that have been submitted, quite a few, in fact, which is very encouraging to see. Over to you, Kerem.
Thanks, Michael, and welcome again to everyone attending the meeting this morning, and good morning to you all. So it's a very exciting time for the company. The recent news flow that we've put out over the last few weeks in particular has led to our ability to update the market with respect to the activities that our team have been undertaking diligently in Zimbabwe for many months now. And that's culminated in the proposed merger with Rockover Holdings. So I'm about to take you through a revised presentation of the company that builds on the presentation that we previously gave during Mines and Money. For those that were there at the Mines and Money presentation, you'll certainly see a number of similarities with that particular situation. So just a recap, really. This is the proposed merger company. The general look and feel of the company as proposed going forward. We'll have multiple advanced projects in Turkey, obviously continuing production at Kızıltepe, and now with Tavşan coming on stream, our announcement of yesterday demonstrated the very first production of gold from the Tavşan operation going through the Kızıltepe CIL plant. Those operations continuing for many years to come, and an announcement that we put out in late March of this year related to the revised resource and reserve update. And that's demonstrated up to a further 10 years of production from the combined Zenit mining operations in Turkey. Then with the addition of the Dowke project, which currently is at about 1.3 million ounce, it's a feasibility stage gold asset in southern Zimbabwe. And a large part of this presentation will be focused very much on that asset. Just to recap some other elements of the company, we are a dividend-paying company, have been since 2021 as part of the special dividend that was paid out in 3 successive installments from that time. It is our intention going forward to continue to pay dividends, but our ability to do that will be balanced against the operational requirements of the business, and in particular is highly dependent on sustained production out of the Tavşan heap leach operation, which is due to come on stream later this year. And once we've done that, then we'll be able to determine the full sort of cash performance characteristics of the business and our ability to pay further dividends thereafter. We've been highly active in exploration over the last couple of years. We've been able to announce a number of exploration updates relating to all of our projects in Turkey, Kızıltepe, Tavşan, and at Salınbaş, and also some satellite areas around the Kızıltepe operations. And we've drilled over 71,000 meters of diamond core across those projects. And of course, put out some really exceptional results across multiple areas. I've mentioned already our revised resource and reserve update, and of course, with the planned addition of the Dowke project, that takes us up to 3.5 million ounces of gold in resources, which is a highly, very powerful position for a junior mining company to be in. Now, most importantly, as a company, we've demonstrated a track record in discovery and project development, and we've done this over many years in Turkey. The Zimbabwean team have demonstrated a successful track record in their own right, notably in the discovery of the Dowke and other projects undercover. And most importantly, of course, this has been done at minimal cost to shareholders. We have a strong financial position with no debt, so specifically at the joint venture or partnership level in Turkey, having paid off about $50 million of bank debt in Turkey since 2014 when it was first taken out. Across other jurisdictions, we've got multiple projects and interests, and I'll touch on a few of those as we go through the presentation. But it's also important that I just draw attention to some of the key partnerships we have with Newmont as a 4% shareholder in the business and supporting our activities in Southeastern Europe through Western Tethyan Resources, and our partners in Turkey, Prosia Construction and Özaltın Holdings. This slide, some of you may remember this from the Mines and Money presentation. This really documents the history of the company in part. From our beginnings at IPO in 2005. These circles demonstrate the growth in the market capitalization, shown in the dark color here, over that period of time. The diversification of our interests through time, notably starting obviously in Turkey, diversifying some of our interests into Australia and elsewhere from around late 2014. And then more recently, with our growing interests in Zimbabwe, the future. And this particular period of time, in 2020 to 2024, we paid out our share of the bank debt, about $25 million, and in dollar terms, again, paid a dividend of about $15 million to shareholders through that period. We consequently saw a marked change in marketization as we brought our Kızıltepe operation on stream, and we completed the Özaltın and Prosia transaction through that period. And we fully expect with the Zimbabwe transaction to continue to grow the company moving forward. So these are our project interests going forward as the proposed merged company. Our Zenit mining operations, Kızıltepe and Tavşan, located in Western Turkey, and our other advanced asset, Pontit Madencilik, the Solunbaş project in northeastern Turkey. And over in Zimbabwe, we have the Dowke project, which is located about 110 kilometers to the west-northwest of Bulawayo. You know most of us, having met us a number of times over the years, and for those again that were able to join us for Mines and Money, there was the opportunity to meet Nick Graham and Andrew du Toit. Nick Graham and Andrew du Toit are planning to join the ARIANA board as part of this merger proposal. Both are based in Zimbabwe and come to us with many years of successful exploration history. And in particular, Nick, as founder of Rockover, and primarily the brains behind the discovery of the Dowke project, is obviously a key man. This slide speaks to our gold and silver production out of Turkey, commencing in 2017, and our proportionate share of gold and silver contributing to US dollar denominated revenue. This has increased over time generally, and in 2022 we recorded our record production with the addition of some high-grade material coming out of the satellite Kepez deposit near Kızıltepe. In 2023, as we continued mining some of the older pits at Kızıltepe, the grades were falling off, and we saw a consequent reduction in output as expected. And we met our guidance again through that period. But this year, our planned guidance going forward, as recently announced, is just slightly over that at about 20,000 ounces for the year from the combined Kızıltepe and Tavşan operation. Bearing in mind that high-grade ore is being trucked to the Kızıltepe site for processing through the CIL. But the graph on the right-hand side shows the growth history of the resources contained by the company from 2007, when we announced our very first JORC resource update, and progressing through time. This is shown in gold equivalent terms to 2021, and we've set this ambitious target of 2025, and of course Dowke fits entirely within that, and it's our expectation that we can continue growing out the resource base at Dowke among other projects within the portfolio. And a large part of the success, of course, of the resource growth that we've seen across the company has been the extensive drilling that's been underway since 2020, 2021. So moving on to Dowke. The Dowke asset, as I mentioned, is located in southern Zimbabwe in a very accessible part of the country. It contains 1.3 million ounces in largely measured and indicated resources, to the extent that over 95% of the total resources are in those categories. So in essence, it's a highly de-risked deposit. Pre-feasibility study was completed in 2022. We're in the process of revising aspects of that, and there'll be further announcements concerning the PFS going forward. But the PFS outlined an opportunity to be producing at a rate of around 65,000 ounces over a 13-year mine life at grades ranging from 1.6 to 1.1 grams per ton of gold. And bearing in mind that relates to the Dowke North part of the ore body in particular. I'll come on to the significance of Dowke North versus Dowke Central in a moment. Dowke represents a bulk tonnage mining opportunity with a low strip ratio, bearing in mind that the Kızıltepe average strip ratio is closer to 15 to 1. So in that sense, this is a low strip ratio ore body, amenable to bulk mining. And the process route is well understood. The metallurgy is relatively straightforward. And we've got a lot of optionality in that with heap leach or CIL processing routes potentially viable. And then downstream, there is the opportunity to go to flotation and enhanced leach thereafter for the more sulfidic part of the ore body at depth. We believe there's a strong potential at Dowke to increase output. There's a lot of optionality, as I said, already in the processing, but there is, we believe, in the mining side of things, particularly if we bring Dowke Central into play as well. And there is an opportunity to potentially get the production up to about 100,000 ounces per annum and compress the mine life as we do that. So on the right-hand side is a top-down view of the Dowke North deposit, showing the grade distribution, the red and purple colors being the very high-grade zones within the deposit, and the yellows and sort of teal colors, some of the lower grade. So you can see that it's an overall low-grade ore body, but it's pocked with these very high-grade zones, which makes for some intriguing optionality in the development of the asset. It was a virgin discovery, as I briefly mentioned, really through a pioneering technique developed by Nick Graham and team. They'd already achieved success in another situation in Zimbabwe in the 1990s, the discovery of the Mali Green deposit. This is the second example of discovery undercover in Zimbabwe. The geometry of the resource lends itself entirely to open pit mining, although there is opportunity, of course, at depth, particularly at Dowke Central, we believe, for underground operations to continue thereafter. Geotechnical conditions have been well understood and modelled. There's been a lot of diamond drilling associated with the geotechnical work into Dowke North, and we've benefited from that. And I've already run through aspects of the metallurgy. So it is an exceptionally good deposit with a lot of upside potential. And I'll continue to talk about that following this video, which is a snapshot of the overall Dowke area. So we can see Dowke North and Dowke Central. We're just zooming into the base camp area now. It's a very well-appointed base camp with over 41,000 meters of well-maintained diamond drill core on site. This is the Dowke ore body, in this case sitting beneath about 40 meters of Kalahari and Karoo cover. And then you go straight into the Archean basement, which is mineralized extensively. So those are the grade shells that we're seeing there, and the drill pattern. That video is certainly worth watching again, but we won't do that in the interest of time. So to speak of the two areas in a little bit more detail, Dowke North is a very large low-grade deposit containing few quartz veins, but punctuated by these very high-grade zones, which do include visible gold. And the photograph in that slide shows an example of one of these exceptionally high-grade zones. Dowke Central has a somewhat different characteristic, somewhat different structural setting. It's a higher grade ore body, pipe-like in its nature, with abundant quartz veins containing these very long high-grade zones. Over here on the top right-hand side of the slide are some of the results of the historic drilling, split between Dowke North and Dowke Central. And you can appreciate from this that there are some exceptional zones of gold mineralization within both deposits. But the Dowke Central, as an example, 49 meters at 4.42 grams per ton of gold, 57 meters at 2.72 grams per ton of gold. I mean, these are absolutely incredible numbers. Now, we've been working on a due diligence drilling campaign, which concluded in February of this year. We've started to receive some of the results, the assay results of that due diligence drilling, and we can very much confirm the presence of gold to the same sort of tenure and lengths, zones of mineralization within the deposit. Notably, this intercept that we announced the other day, 45 meters at 2.75 grams per ton from Dowke North. Now, of course, there's a lot of exploration upside within the Dowke region. This map on the left-hand side shows the claim boundaries outlined in blue, and the geochemically anomalous areas for gold at Dowke North, Dowke Central, and this very large geochemical anomaly known as Shaba. Now, interestingly, while Dowke North and Dowke Central have been drill tested, Shaba has not been tested to any degree. There is some surface geochemistry, obviously, and there's a few holes into the periphery. But as a whole, this area has not received a huge amount of exploration to date. So that's an exciting area for future exploration upside, but let alone the exploration upside on the main deposits at Dowke North and Dowke Central, of which we believe there's plenty to come. So placing those claim boundaries into a broader context, in the map on the right-hand side, you can see the position of Dowke and the position of Bulueo, the sort of grey shaded area, on a background of geophysics. And around the Dowke claims are a series of EPO applications that have been put in place by Rockover. And of course, we're waiting to hear on the approval of those EPO applications for more regional exploration that would provide further potential upside downstream. But there's already plenty of exploration upside, as I've demonstrated at Dowke North and Dowke Central in any case. And I'll skip through the following slides fairly quickly. This is just a recap on our Kızıltepe operations in Turkey, maintaining very successful, very steady production since 2017, consistently beating guidance over the years. We have now benefited from the introduction of some high-grade tavşan ore that has been trucked down to Kızıltepe for trial processing, and we've had the benefit of the initial results of that, which were announced yesterday. And that Tavşan ore is going to contribute significantly to the overall output of the Kızıltepe CIL through 2024. As we continue to build out the Tavşan mine site, and as we expect the Tavşan mine to commence heap leach operations later in the year. The graph that we show here demonstrates the historical production shown in blue of the Kızıltepe operation, the expectation of Tavşan contributing from this year onwards in orange, and then going forward for potentially 8 years thereafter. And then downstream, the potential addition of the Salınbaş operation thereafter. But of course, Salınbaş is still at an exploration and development stage, so the timing on that is less well constrained. Just to speak very quickly on our incubator strategy that we commenced a number of years ago. We have been involved in developing Western Tethyan resources operating in Southeast Europe from a Kosovo base. We have partnered with Newmont to in part fund the exploration in Kosovo, and they have been exceptional strategic partners for both ourselves as shareholders in ARIANA and for Western Tethyan, supporting the exploration work being undertaken across that region very successfully. And Venus Minerals, likewise, we've been highly involved in the development of Venus over the last few years. We had been moving Venus towards a potential IPO in London, but we pulled that back because of broader strategic objectives in relation to our proposed merger with Rockover Holdings. And of course, I haven't had the opportunity to mention the Salınbaş project too much, but our partnership again with Özaltın and Presea in relation to that project, with $8 million having been injected into further exploration and development by Özaltın Holdings. But it's important to just note that the Dowke project essentially emerged out of this originator and incubator strategy that was run through our Asgard fund in Australia. So to quickly cap this off with a summary before we open up the floor to questions. ARIANA has a highly experienced management team, a strong track record of bringing greenfields projects in frontier jurisdictions into production. That is matched by the incoming Rockover team. They've got a very similar background, having been successful over very many decades in Zimbabwe and Southern Africa generally. Very similar mentality to ourselves, to the extent that their discovery cost per ounce is essentially the same as ARIANA. So that certainly speaks to something there. We've now secured a very exciting growth asset through our proposed merger with Rockover Holdings, which is at a very compelling valuation at a significant discount to the MPV on the associated project. We are pursuing a potential dual listing on ASX later in the year, and the idea here in part is to improve stock liquidity and of course attract a new investor base into the company. We're absolutely focused on shareholder returns, demonstrated through our track record of de-risking projects through our partnerships, and this is largely without recourse to funding routes through our shareholders. And we're developing all projects through to production, as we have done in Turkey, or achieving alternative beneficial outcomes for our shareholders. Follows a whole series of slides in the appendices that give more background and information across all the projects. Our incubator fund over here in detail, our partnerships, a peer group analysis of other Zimbabwean explorers and developers, some of which are well-known names like Zimplats Holding, Caledonia Mining, and then a snapshot of the peer group that was utilized to create a sort of baseline for the evaluation of the Rockover Dowke asset, and then some background information on both Turkey and on Zimbabwe for those that are interested. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Kerem. That was a very good update. We've got a couple of questions coming in via the Q&A platform. as well as quite a number submitted in advance, which we've had time to look at. I suggest that what we do is perhaps discuss the history of Dowke and Rockover Holdings in the context of your experience of Zimbabwe and my experience of Zimbabwe, and the fact that we actually met up with them last year at 1-to-1 in Daba, and the discussion started then. So I think perhaps our shareholders don't appreciate for how long we've actually been in discussions with them and how much due diligence we've managed to do with most of our directors visiting site and all of our geological team. And
Yes.
ahead of us actually negotiating this transaction, we spent a lot of time and effort getting to know the project and the environment.
Yes, definitely. So on the due diligence side of things and the sort of post-early negotiations with Rockover, a lot of work's been underway for well over a year now in relation to both Dowke as the asset and Rockover more generally. Just maybe briefly, what's taking a further step back, I'd started my career in Zimbabwe in the late 90s, and I've maintained my network in Zimbabwe over many years. Andrew, I first met at the Shamva mine. Andrew had been working with SRK Consulting at the time. I was based at Shamva. So these are connections that go back a long way. But in any case, more recently, they've made the discovery of Dowke. They've advanced that through PFS, and it was really at that stage that we had the opportunity to properly engage with the Rockover team in relation to the Dowke asset. We conducted a first site visit in July of last year, and we've been working through the process of due diligence to the extent that we undertook 4 diamond drill holes from late last year into the asset. We also secured 2.1% of Rockover in the process of doing so. And then we've continued the work on site. So as Michael's mentioned, a large part of our technical team has been on and off site over very many months. So we're comfortable with the geological opportunity, the exploration upside. We're also comfortable with the country. I mean, Zimbabwe is a very workable country in southern Africa. Sure, it's had some difficulties over the last couple of decades, but to a large degree, from around 2018 onwards, so after the Mugabe period, that the country has seen some improvement. And you can see this just if you look at the graph of Zimbabwean GDP over the last couple of years. It's really lifted. And speaking of GDP, mining is such a significant component of the Zimbabwean economy, accounting for about 12%. The country has a huge amount of expertise associated with the mining industry. People are very well educated, and there are other advantages, being English speaking, English law background. So it ticks a number of boxes. And of course, the geological opportunity within the country has been known by many people for very, very many years. So we're very pleased to be taking on a project with Dowke's merits.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I spent a fair amount of my working life in Southern Africa, outside of South Africa, notably the surrounding countries, and had experience in Zimbabwe, and it was good experience. So that as a background, we've been in the process of negotiating and valuing our respective camps, and that discussion, I think it's worth mentioning that we did bring in a professional valuer whose industry standard work was used on the table as part of our discussions. Mm-hmm. And the result is that we're actually buying ounces through this merger process at approximately the same cost as our historical discovery cost per ounce, which is probably the best guidance as to that it is a good deal for both parties, and particularly our shareholders.
Yeah, and that's really a critical point, that we're effectively bringing on ounces at the same discovery cost as our own historic discovery cost. But without the 20 years of exploration history that it took to identify those 1.3 million ounces. So you're completely cutting out 20 years of exploration risk, effectively. So it's a huge advantage to shareholders that two entities, as I said, that have got very similar ways of thinking, particularly when it comes to the use of innovative techniques in mineral exploration, and demonstrably so because they have been able to maintain such low discovery costs historically. And you're bringing that intelligence together on a new platform on the back of an asset that is clearly a mid-tier company asset. And that's really where we want to be. We're developing ARIANA as a mid-tier company. And all the steps that we've taken over the last several years have been to achieve that outcome.
Okay, so we've got ourselves to a point where we now are looking at a corporate strategy of developing the next big asset. We've taken what normally is a very long development cycle in the mining history in modern times of 15 to 16 years to bring a mine from discovery to production, and we're truncating it somewhat. We can't say exactly how much, but I'd like your views on how much you think we've taken away from that 15 to 16 year cycle, and in the case of our own experience, even longer.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the development of the Kızıltepe asset, the post-PFS stage to first production, Kızıltepe itself, we went through various delays associated with permitting in the country, but we worked our way through it with our partners. That process really took us about 5 years. So what we're saying is that post-PFS or post-feasibility study, you can get an operation running within a relatively short period of time. What takes the time is the discovery part of the process. And the discovery part of the process can take decades. In most cases, it's not unusual for a gold project to move into production after 20 or even 25 years. I think the average is somewhere around 16 globally. But in the case of Turkey, it's more like plus 20, usually around 25 years. That's the reality that we have to deal with as a business. But most of that time is associated with the post-discovery and then proving up stages of the mineral resource. So it's all the drilling that goes on, moving to the project towards feasibility can take decades. And what we're doing is cutting all of that out. So we can just focus on the feasibility stage onwards, which is a matter of years.
Okay, so we've got a PFS that was done by Rockover, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and we've got some work being done on that now. That dovetails into a few questions that we've got. One is, when might it come out? 2, what is the capital cost likely to be? 3, how long is it going to take us to take this to production? Which is where I think we're aiming to go, and we're quite frank about that.
Yes, definitely. So quite right. The PFS was completed in 2022. We're now going through a process of updating the PFS in terms of capital and operating cost, scaling that upwards with CPI. We're also looking at a revised base case gold scenario. The base case for the prior PFS was $1,650 an ounce. Clearly, that's no longer particularly valid. So we're going with a $2,000 base case and then scaling up and down around that. We're also looking at the NPV 10 situation specifically. The prior PFS focused on an NPV 8, but we're adding a further discount to that. But again, we'll provide a scaling around that discount rate. There will be further updates that we will need to do to the PFS longer term, but this is just an interim update to essentially bring it in line with more modern parameters, albeit that it's only a couple of years out of date itself. There is another step that we have to take, and that is the work that's being undertaken after the conclusion of our due diligence diamond drilling program. And as I said, we've been receiving the assays of that program, some of which we've been able to announce. There'll be more to come, but that assay data is being integrated into a revised geological model, along with all of our improved understanding of Dowke following months of work, particularly with field portable XRF across all the historic core. So we've got a much more refined geological model for Dowke than existed at the time of the PFS. And on the back of the refined geological model, we will have a new resource update. So our plan is to put that resource update out to the market, and then again revise the PFS with the new resource. So there'll be a few stages to go through over the next couple of months, but we're very much on track to achieve all of those as we complete the merger process.
So there are a number of iterations to the PFS that we will see in the next couple of months.
Yes, very much so.
Okay. Well, that significantly impacts on what this asset will look like post that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, now
the other thing that's just worth mentioning, and just to recap a little bit on something I mentioned in the presentation, is one of the attractions of Dowke is that there is this large, generally low-grade ore body that sits there, but it's punctuated with these very high-grade zones. Then you've got Dowke Central, which is less well understood, and it's a JORC 2004 compliant resource, but it is generally at much higher grade. Between those two locations, there's a huge amount of potential operational optionality in terms of how the deposit is staged in its development. And we've got to look at that as well, particularly in the context of a post-PFS. So this is really feasibility stage work, to look at the various processing. So whether it's CIL, heap leach, flotation, or some combination of those three things, and indeed gravity for the very high grade zones. But we'll look at the optionality across those different scenarios with respect to the schedule of mine development across both Dowke North and Dowke Central. There are a few examples in the world of such optionality. And yes, this is largely down to the nature of the mineralization, being a relatively simple, typical Archean gold system, with no deleterious elements associated with it. It is essentially a gold deposit only. In addition to that, the metallurgy is very straightforward. So there are a huge number of plus points to how we potentially develop Dowke going forward.
Okay. The other thing that has come out through the number of questions we've seen is how much is it going to cost, i.e. what's the capex, and who will we be partnering with and how will be funded. Now, using the same model that we developed, Kızıltepe, Tavşan, Talınbaş, Zenit model, we've had some discussions and there is some interest, but in order of magnitude, I don't think we can say what the capital cost of the plant is going to be just yet, because that's going to come out of the PFS. But it'll obviously be bigger than Kızıltepe, and it may be a multiple.
Absolutely.
Or three.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be bigger than Kızıltepe. And Kızıltepe, in its original form, had a capex of about $33 million. But as the project developed and as the asset grew, and we had to modify plans during that process, we included the addition of an additional mill and other infrastructure at Kızıltepe. So all up, the capex requirements of a small operation like Kızıltepe, producing about 20 to 25 plus thousand ounces per annum, was around $50 million. We believe that a potential processing route similar to the one that we've implemented at Kızıltepe could be applied to the development of the first stage of Dowke. So again, it comes down to how we sequence its development and what infrastructure we need to put in place. So yes, we could do it relatively cheaply, like Kızıltepe, but in order to properly scale it over time with the development of both Dowke North and Dowke Central, bearing in mind that a lot of the ore is relatively low grade and is more amenable to heap leaching, we'd need more infrastructure, more capital cost. So the number will be north of 50 million. And 75 million is probably a good place to be thinking of pitching a number. But yes, there's very much more work to do on that front.
Well, that sort of capital comes from bank financing, and when you've got a well-funded, well-structured project, funding becomes part of that process.
Yep.
Initially, we're going to have to pay for the work that we do on it now out of our own resources, and in time we will look at talking to our joint venture partners of the past and maybe of the future, and seek for them to put some of the money in as well.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And we've had really good initial discussions with both Procea and Zoltan in relation to our emerging interest in Zimbabwe, to the extent that we had the opportunity last year to introduce both Nick and Andrew to our Turkish partners following a site visit to Turkey that we conducted. So on the Procea side in particular, I'm regularly speaking to the team over there, and they're very much interested in certainly assisting how we develop an asset like Dowke through the feasibility stage. So that's just, at the initial level, that could turn into something else, some other level of interest. But I would certainly be very keen to involve the Procea team on the feasibility stage development of Dowke, because we've done it with them before. We've got a relationship that goes back 14 years, and we've done wonderful things together as a partnership in Turkey. And there's absolutely no reason to look for others when we've got such a robust partnership with Procea.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the questions have also been focused around, are we intending to stay on AIM? Because we've talked about an ASX listing, and dovetailed into that is funding. And if you are going to list on ASX, there will be some funding involved, i.e. placing of shares to administer that process. But I think we should also talk about the timetable of what's likely to happen with regard to this. Given that the due diligence stacks up, we will put a resolution to our shareholders, which will be an ordinary resolution to authorize the issue of the consideration shares, and in that process authorize the transaction, and that's scheduled for during June.
Yes.
I think it's our corporate focus to remain on AIM. There's no change in our plan on that. We're a British company, and this is all likely to wind up during the latter half of June.
Yes, yeah, very, very much so. The ASX plan is a separate work stream. It's running partly in parallel with what we're doing on the merger front, but it's our intention that post-merger we'll be taking that enlarged company, because we'll be looking at a market cap that's probably approaching 100 million Australian dollars. I mean, at that sort of level, we very much get ourselves onto institutional radars over here in Australia. So the idea is then to bring that enlarged company onto the ASX. We would undertake a compliance listing, essentially, but we'd be looking to certainly attract institutional investment at that stage to be able to carry the Dowke feasibility forward at the pace that we intend, because we strongly believe that it's an asset that we can advance through feasibility very quickly, because so much good quality work has already been done. I mean, it's something that I hadn't actually stressed in the presentation, but it's apparent from the video. Dowke North has been pattern drilled to sufficient detail to enable the project to move into feasibility without drilling a single additional hole if we wanted. Of course, that's not what we want. We want to be able to drill more holes so we can continue to grow the resource. But bearing in mind that there is already an established reserve there, we're not talking about resources anymore. There's about 0.8 million ounces of reserves, proven and probable. Now, we believe through some additional exploration resource drilling, we could probably take that to about 1 million ounces in reserves. And that's really where we want to end up for the purpose of the feasibility study. And that has to be fast-tracked. So we would very much like to attract the sort of institutional support from the ASX and indeed over in London to be able to achieve that. Okay.
I think it's just worth mentioning that we remain an AIM company through this entire process. And there's no plan to not be on AIM.
Yes, I mean, the intention is to be dual listed.
Yes, and the bulk of our share register is on AIM on a British register, so there's no change in that. One of the things that came up quite frequently was the discussion around dividend and special dividend. Historically, we paid a special dividend because we had special circumstances. We did a transaction. What we're doing now is building a bigger company with a long-term profit margin built in, and that should allow us to pay dividends in the future. But there is no plan to pay a special dividend during this process. That's not what we'll be doing with the cash. We'll be using the cash to develop Dowke and our other assets as we have done through the years.
Yes, that's correct. As I mentioned during the presentation, there is a mechanism by which future dividends could be paid by virtue of our Zenit mining operations in Turkey.
Yes.
On the back of the profits from Zenit mining operations, once we've completed the capital expenditure requirements of the Tavşan mine build, we do expect a dividend flow from Zenit back to the respective partners, ARIANA, Prussia and Özaltın. And then on the back of that, obviously Zenit has its own other operational needs, but on the back of that, we can take a view on how sustainable that is going forward, and then what our operational needs are as a business, particularly as we develop Dowke, and then any excess capital, of course, that would we would consider a future dividend policy thereafter.
Right, Kerem, I think we've in broad approach covered what came in the last 2 days. What we have now is quite a number of questions that have come in via the platform, and I think we should roll through them and go through those that we can answer that are different to what we've been discussing.
Yes, so we had, I think, over 50 questions pre-submitted, which we've taken the time to answer almost all of those, and so they're ready, sitting on the platform. So as soon as the presentation and Q&A has come to an end, that can be released. But yeah, we've had a number of other questions coming through as we've been talking, Michael. Just quickly flicking through them. There are a few that are very easy to answer, a few that we might need to take a little bit more time on. One of the easy ones, which I think it does have some relevance, question from Lovro R. What are the roads and infrastructure like around Dowke? So Dowke is located, as I said, in southern Zimbabwe, not far from the second largest city in the country, Bulawayo. But Bulawayo is essentially a mining hub, has been in many ways for well over 100 years. There's a lot of infrastructure associated with the town of Bulawayo. You've got the international airport, for starters. You've got very good roads, linking to other parts of the country. One of the roads that goes out towards the Botswana border, it's an asphalt road for a large part of its way, maybe 2/3 of the way, and it's a good quality road. Then goes into a graded track out to site, and that's a good quality graded track. So access to site is very straightforward. There's no issue there.
Kerem, I'd agree with that. I went out to site in January this year, flew into the international airport. In the past, I've traveled in and out of Zimbabwe, both on pleasure and on business in the last 30 years. Very accessible, no issues there. Question that's come from Nick V. How concerned are you that gold mines become a target in a similar way that farms were in the past in Zimbabwe? Well, I'm not concerned about that because there are so many international operators in Zimbabwe that have not been targeted in any way that I know of. So I'm not sure that's even the question.
That's correct, and they're different. They're different things. I mean, without going into the politics of it, mines, have been developed by international companies very successfully for many, many decades in Zimbabwe. And you've got the likes of Zimplats, as I mentioned, Anglo-American, both operators of first world mines on the Great Dike in Zimbabwe producing PGMs. You've got other major producers at the recent Arcadia lithium project near Harare, Chinese owned in part, Australian owned, more minority shareholding there. You've had over many decades exploration and mining companies working on gold assets across the country. From a British company perspective, one of the largest gold mining companies operating in the country for a very, very long time, but no longer, was Lonrho, what became the Lonmin Group.
Yes.
But their reasons for divesting out of Zimbabwe in the early 2000s were quite different. They had other structural issues to sort out as a company. But those old Lonmin assets, many of them still operating very successfully in the country. So they're all scales of operations. Further to the south of Bulawayo is the Caledonia blanket operation. That's been operational very successfully for very many years, has been a consistent dividend payer to its shareholders. So no, I don't have those sorts of concerns associated with mineral development operations in the country.
Okay. I think we should perhaps talk a little bit about our other portfolio assets in the few minutes we've got left. Briefly, what's going on in Kosovo and what can we expect from there?
Yes. So in Kosovo, we have obviously had a very robust partnership established with Newmont. Newmont have been funding very significant exploration across Kosovo and into North Macedonia in particular. A very large scale stream sediment sampling program has been undertaken across both countries. Is still underway in North Macedonia. They've been applying the latest development of their BLEG technology. It's a particular low-level gold detection methodology that was to a large extent pioneered by Normandy, Newmont. And we've had some real success out of that deployment. And in addition to that, based on the existing assets in Kosovo, the Hatita project has been drilled for the first time. That's a project near the Serbian border. We'd identified a porphyry copper gold type system there, and the drilling has certainly proven that theory, and we'll have further updates out on that in due course. There's further work underway also at some of the other projects held by Western Tethyan, and indeed an agreement that we've got with Arupa Minerals in relation to the Slivova gold asset in the country. That's a relatively small project, but high grade, and we believe that it's got the same sort of opportunity that Kızıltepe once presented to us in Turkey. So we believe that it has strategic value to the development of Western Tethyan in Kosovo, and we're very much interested in continuing to support that.
Right. In Cyprus, we've not proceeding with the Venus IPO at this time, but work's still carrying on there.
Oh, very much so. So the reason for winding back on the IPO strategy was really to avoid any complication as we move towards an ASX listing. We had to stop that wheel from moving. So we had a particular cutoff. That cutoff was the end of March, and the market in London has not been particularly good. Very few IPOs, people I'm sure fully aware, that have occurred successfully in London over recent times, certainly through the last year to 18 months. But we're still very excited about the Cypriot portfolio. We've demonstrated that these are not just copper systems, they are gold systems as well. So that very much ticks a box for corporately. We've got a really good team in Cyprus, and we've got everything going for the company in the country. We're also maintaining a watch on the Apliki asset and maintain dialogue with the owners of Apliki if we want to move eventually the Venus portfolio into a sort of production type setting. But we just had to hold off on the IPO strategy. And it's something that we could potentially revisit in the future, but it didn't make any sense to do so at this particular point in time.
Okay. Stellenbosch's ongoing work, Zoltan have been putting in a significant amount of money, and they have scheduled to put in $8 million, and I think they've already spent over half of it. But
yeah, they spent well over half
ongoing.
of that 8 million. And you know, for the avoidance of doubt, that was $8 million cash that was placed into the bank account of the project company, Ponted Maardenschlik. So it's under effectively under broader Zenit operational control, with Procia being managers of that. But it is its own project entity with a single asset, Sullenbusch. And of course, we've developed that exploration around Sullenbusch, and we've made the discovery of Huzarliala as a result of the successful drilling campaigns that were undertaken across the Sullenbusch project. And that's all come down to Azalten funding. So we're very much the beneficiaries of that Azalten deal in that case.
Okay. Last but not least, Kiziltepe and Taushan. So Kiziltepe is running on a large supply of Taushan ore, high-grade ore. Taushan, on the other hand, is completing its last project phases to go into production this year. Do you want to outline what that picture looks like and what we can expect from there?
Yes, so that's quite right. I've been in the process of mining ore from Taushan, the main pit. We've defined a number of high-grade zones within the main pit area. That's been selectively extracted. Some of it's been stockpiled on site at Taushan itself. The very high-grade material, so you know, typically over 2 grams per ton, approaching 3 grams per ton material. That's been trucked down to the Kiziltepe plant, and there's a separate stockpile at Kiziltepe, and we're processing that on a trial basis, and have done for the last couple of months. We've seen the response of the Taushan ore through the Kiziltepe CIL, and it's performing very well. And on the back of that, we've been able to update our forward schedule to accommodate more of the Taushan ore, bearing in mind that the Taushan ore on average is coming in at about 2.5 grams per ton of gold. So, you know, it's better grade, in fact, than what we're currently mining out of the Kiziltepe pits. So it certainly makes sense to ensure that we've got a steady stream of high-grade Taushan ore at Kiziltepe. And as a result of that, we were able to update our guidance figures for the year, which was the announcement of yesterday.
Okay. Kerem, I think we're coming up on time. I think it's worth mentioning that the submitted questions will have written replies published, in addition to the questions and answers that were raised on Q&A platform here. We'll give some written answers to those as well. To those of you who are in London during mid-May, Kerem and team will be at 1-to-1 for at least one of the days. I'm not sure if it's both.
Both days, yeah.
If they're around, and we may very well meet up and have a chat as well. But last but not least, thank everyone for attending, and thank you for your questions, and thanks for the excellent update, Kerem. Jack,
yeah, thank you to everyone for their time, and for all those questions that have come in during the course of the presentation. You know, some of those I know we have answered in the dialogue between Michael and I in some form, but others that are maybe more specific questions, we'll get around to providing written responses to many of those shortly after the presentation.
Perfect. Kerem, Michael, if I may just jump back in there, and thank you very much indeed for addressing all of those questions that came in for investors. And of course, we will give you back all of the questions that were submitted today, just for you to review and to then add any additional responses, of course, where it's appropriate to do so. And we'll publish all those responses out on the platform. But if it's okay, guys, if I may, what I'll do now is I'll redirect those on the call to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to you both. So could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can really better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of ARIANA Resources PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, so good morning to you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.